Yo, and welcome back to the LOP show. I'm Blake Bozarth, and this is Leadership on Purpose, the show that's designed to help you grow your influence and lead with confidence and with humility. And I know you've heard me say this before, but we have another incredible guest on the show today. This is Dallas Clement. He is the president and CFO of Cox Enterprises. If you know anything about Cox, they're based out of Atlanta. It's a $23 billion company, 50,000 plus employees. They own things like Auto Trader, Kelley Blue Book, and Cox Communications. It's really well regarded in terms of the culture at Cox. They're very values driven. And as you get a feel for Dallas in this episode, you can see why. When you have a senior executive leader like this, the way that he leads and the way that he thinks, I think that you'll really enjoy his insights. There's a lot of nuggets in today's episode. And one of my favorites is going to be about how do you own your voice and own your story. I love this concept of having an elevator pitch for your professional life. So in 30 seconds, what is it that makes you unique? What do you bring to the table? How do you stand out? And how do you weave your personal story into that? If you don't have that sort of elevator pitch, I think the example that Dallas gives for his own personal career, I think can be very helpful for you. There's some other stuff that Dallas shares, his resilience, his story, the way that he's overcome adversity in his own life. Very, very admirable and inspiring. And so I think you're going to enjoy this episode, guys. What do we like to say? If you do, be a river, not a reservoir. Who could you share this with that could also get value from it as well? And without further ado, let's jump into the show. Dallas, thank you so much for being on the show. Welcome.
Blake, Chat, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
We're super excited to have you today. I know you have a lot of nuggets that you're going to share for our audience, particularly as it relates to early career younger professionals as they're growing and leveling up. Before we get into the meat of that, we're going to ask you our patented intro question, and that is, can you tell us a little bit about you and your career in 60 seconds?
Happy to. I've been at Cox for 34 years, the first 20 in our cable group, first 10 of that in finance, the last 10 in product and strategy. Then I spent 5 years in our automotive group as CFO and had a bunch of accountabilities under that. And then the last 9 years as president CFO of Cox Enterprises, where I'm responsible for our diversification and our growth strategies, capital allocation. I spend a lot of time now thinking about talent and people and capital allocation. I've got 4 daughters based here in Atlanta. And again, thanks for having me.
That was too good. 30 seconds to spare.
There you go. I'm an overachiever.
That's amazing. So we did hear that you are surrounded by women in your life. So 4 daughters, and what's the rest of that context?
Yeah. So my dad was an only child, no siblings. My mother had 2 sisters, no brothers. One got married, one did not. The one that got married, 4 daughters. So all my first cousins are girls. My parents had me, then 3 daughters. So all my siblings are girls. And I've got 4 daughters. So all my kids are girls. So I was the mistake.
That's amazing. Well, hey, just as we kind of keep diving in here, I do have one fun personal question for you. So, like you said, you've been at Cox for 34 years, and we heard to the grapevine that your start was an interesting one, potentially involving a neck injury. Can you tell us a little bit more just about what your start was like in that way?
Sure. Well, this is back in 1990 and the Gulf War was happening, hard to get jobs, no internet. So there was no recruiting. There was no podcasting, none of that. So you found jobs by sending letters to companies. And I sent a letter to a recruiter in Atlanta, and they were looking for somebody to work in strategic planning for a media communications company based in Atlanta. I applied. I was fortunate enough to get the job. I accepted on a Monday, and I was at Stanford Graduate School. And that Friday, I'm riding my bike back from classes. I got hit by a car, compression fracture. Top of my head went into the windshield and broke C6 and C7. So I spent the next week in traction, and then had a halo vest for 3 months. And I started the day I said I would start, June 26th, I believe it was, 1990. But I started with a halo vest. And so that was in the middle of the summer for Atlanta. So it was hot. And so as to prevent scarring, because I had a bolt right here, 2 bolts there, 2 bolts here, you put betadine there to prevent scarring. Well, betadine is red and you're sweating. And so it would drip down and made me look like Frankenstein because I had bolts in my head and betadine dripping down. I was a pretty sight.
Oh my goodness, that is quite a story, and that one I'm sure most people would never forget.
Well, what's amazing about being at one company for 34 years, it's amazing how many people, you know, aren't aware of that story because they weren't here 34 years ago.
So seeing where you've gone in your career, is that the key to career success? Is starting with that kind of crazy neck injury story?
Y y you know, it's a it's a good question, the secret to career success, and, I mean, I tell you, you have a point of view when you're early in your career, and then as you get older, a little bit wiser, a little bit more experienced, the way I think about it is the what and the how of work, and the what is, you know what, you're hired to do something. Do what you're hired to do. Don't play games. Just do the best quality you can. Do what you were hired to do. That's the what. The how is where you differentiate, and the how is, how you ask questions, how you show up and support other teammates, how you have other people's back, how you consider the implications of a decision or an activity that might negatively impact someone else's work stream, et cetera. And when you're able to think that holistically and show up that well with good attitude and enthusiasm, in my mind, that's what differentiates you, and the way you communicate, that's what differentiates you. And that's what sort of sets the stage for your next opportunity within a company.
Concept of the what and the how. So the what is kind of you know what your job description is. The how is really what differentiates and separates you. From your perspective, Dallas, what is it that when you see in yourself from your own kind of career progression, but when you also are looking at high potential talent and talent that's really moving through your organization today, what's different about the way they're approaching the how?
I think when you're young, you're afraid to ask questions and afraid to engage because you're afraid you'll be wrong. You're afraid you'll look stupid, and the reality is when I'm visiting with a large group, if no one's asking questions, I have no idea what they're thinking about. No idea. They may be thinking about the errand they have to run after work or what they're going to do this weekend. And so even if it's quote a stupid question, and there are no stupid questions, it shows engagement. It shows they care. And you know what? That is part of how. So I think that's really important. I think people not being afraid to put themselves out. I think people providing context on a decision and a conversation, because everyone comes to a conversation with different history, different background, different experience, different context. That's also part of the how. And so I think as you visit with folks and in our meetings with folks, you really come to appreciate how someone sort of shows up in a meeting and really owns it. And I so appreciate that, especially young people. I was just this morning a young associate here, an external banker sent an email to us trying to introduce us to a company. And oftentimes people will wait for me because I'm the senior most person on the email, wait for me to respond. But this young individual, he sort of owned the topic area, and he was quick to respond in the perfect right way. And I complimented and acknowledged that and so appreciated that. I always hate it when I'm in a meeting and everyone's waiting for me to be the one asking questions and to sort of own the conversation. I'd rather have the group own the conversation because everyone gets a little smarter and everyone thinks about issues and problems and opportunities a little differently. And you'll get to a better decision if everyone is engaging, no matter where you come from, no matter your level of experience.
That's good. I'm hearing quite a few things there that I think are just worth highlighting. Number one, like pathological curiosity, having the willingness and the desire to ask questions, tell me more, and just wanting to kind of approach your work as a student and
Mhm.
learn. And the other thing that I'm thinking about, you said how sometimes people are waiting for you to respond because you're the most senior person in the room, but you see development in other people when they're willing to jump in, and that stands out to you. How, as a leader, do you create a culture where people feel comfortable enough, if that makes sense, to take that risk to say, I'm going to step in and I am going to own this? Like over time, how do you develop that amongst a team or amongst a group in an organization like Cox?
It's a good question, and you can't do that overnight. It happens over time. I used to run product at Cox Communications way back when, and one of my product guys on the video side, there was a video engineer outside of my group, and the two of them couldn't get along at all. They could not agree on anything. And I remember this one meeting where a vendor came in pitching an interactive television application. And I sent an email to both of them wondering if that application, rather than what the vendor was pitching it, if it could be used as middleware for a common electronic program guide for us. And the video engineer was quick to sort of say, that's the stupidest idea I've ever heard. And afterwards, he sort of said, whoops, I just called Dallas stupid. He sent an email unbeknownst to me to my video product person, who again, he hated, and said, whoops, did I do something wrong by essentially calling Dallas stupid? And the video product person said, no, Dallas is always going to put it out there and he just wants to get to the right answer. You're fine. And so, I offer that example because I think that kind of environment happens over time, and it's example after example after example, and people will get comfortable and they'll get to know you, and other people will say, "No, I was in a meeting with Dallas and he encouraged that," and this the so I think it happens over time. It's the way you walk. It's you got to walk the talk.
That's really good. Thinking about it from the leader's perspective of how you're creating that kind of environment. I also, as you were talking, Dallas, I'm thinking back to my first few months on the job and fresh out of college, and I was a part of this development program. So I was in different parts of the company. They'd rotate you around, and I remember I was young. I think I was 21 years old at the time, and there were people I was working with that were 15, 20 years my senior and tenured at the company. And I remember like my my I guess posture was one of, hey, I don't want to step on anybody's toes. I don't want to try to make somebody think that I'm trying to be the hot shot coming in to outshine. And I was very deferential. And so there's parts of that were good. And they're like back to like the humility part of leadership. That part of it was good. But I had my VP at the time who called me aside and he said, hey, I'm noticing some of this stuff. I'm noticing that you're not stepping up, you're not voicing your opinion enough, you're not doing X, Y, and Z, you're not taking action, taking initiative. Why is that? Got to the bottom of it with me. He's like, well, guess what? You you joined the Eager Beaver program, so you need to be more eager, right? You need to do this stuff. And for me at the time, even though like it was hard for me to hear that, it was such an important message. And I think that especially with just this generation, I do see a lot of in the Gen Z generation, I see a lot of younger people who have a ton of skills and a ton of great things to add. But I also see some reticence to be able to actually ask questions and then even give opinions too. So I just wanted to speak to that to say that I've been there, I've experienced that. And it wasn't until I had someone who was much more senior than me to say, hey, you actually need to exercise your voice. You need to, and being able to hold those things. We talk about the importance of leading with humility and with confidence, whichever angle you need. Some people are over indexed on one than the other, but for me, it was indexing more to the confidence side. So really appreciate that. I know you also talk about the importance of understanding and being able to talk about your story and how important that is when it comes to your personal brand and your career success. Can you expound more on that for us?
Yeah, I'm going to offer one retort to what you said before about your situation when you were first in. When I went to Auto Trader as a CFO, I was sort of one of the more senior persons. And as CFO, when a CFO asks a question, sometimes it can shut down a conversation because people think you're going to take away budget dollars or you don't trust them. And so
Mm,
the first year as CFO, as people were getting to know me, I had to preface every question with, hey, look, I'm new. I don't know this business as well as you do. So I'm just asking this question so I can better understand. And finally,
mm,
after a year, the chief marketing officer said, Dallas, stop with the frickin' preface. Just ask the question already. So, it takes time, it takes time to do that. So, you know, I so enjoy visiting with younger folks. And I really, part of my role now is to mentor more. And I talk to some of we have 125 interns most every summer in our corporate campus here in Atlanta. And I talked to them and offered sort of four pieces of advice. One was you got to have your story. The other is the what and the how of work. The other was a book recommendation. And the last was decision making. And so we talked a little bit about the what and the how. In terms of the story, everyone needs to have their elevator speech on what their story is, what drives them, what's their differentiator. Part of my story, let's just take me being sort of CFO. when I had conversations with folks and they wanted to understand, hey, do you want to be CFO of this other company? I said, well, look, if you're looking for a controller type who has a CPA, that's not me. I don't have a CPA. I was an applied math major. If you're looking for a CFO who's more strategic, more a business partner to the CEO, that's more me. That's an easy, short story that sort of tells you what I think I'm good at, what I'm interested in, and differentiates me from others. Part of my story is I'm a girl dad. So I've got 4 daughters, and I learn as much in the home environment as I do in the work environment and vice versa. And I've got a family motto, no crying, be helpful, go fast. That was informed by having a big group and trying to get momentum and learning that everyone has a pocket veto towards anything. And so I've got stories around that. I've got stories about, I naively thought that the kids, especially 4 of the same sex, would all be very similar. They couldn't be more different. So all of that is part of my story. I'm dyslexic. That's part of my story. And depending on the situation and the environment, different aspects of that come up as relevant to the circumstance, but it's all part of your personal story. And that's what makes everyone unique and what makes everyone interesting. So that's the story. And everyone needs to have it. And your story changes. When you first graduate from college, your story might be you want to work in New York City. That's okay. There's no bad filter when you graduate. When you're in your 30s, your story might be you want to live in a house because you're married and you have kids rather than living in a condo. That's okay. Your story might be you want to be an entrepreneur. That's okay. There's nothing bad. It's what drives you. It's what you're passionate about and what you want to share with whoever is the target audience and whatever is the situation.
I love just this concept and this encouragement for people to own their story, and hearing it from a leader such as yourself, I think is critical, because one, I think it gives us permission to allow our story to change as the seasons of our life change, and that's important. It kind of allows for the flexibility, like you said. But then two, there's vulnerability in our story. And I think sometimes, at least I know for me early on in my career, I was afraid at certain moments to be vulnerable about certain aspects of my story, thinking that it might hurt my career or something like that. But what I've found is, especially when I do it with the right intent of being understood or being able to work more effectively with a leader, it helps other people understand why I show up the way I do and how I show up, because that frames context. And I've seen that vulnerability can help increase collaboration with business partners or whoever it would be, or even clients sometimes. Can you maybe speak to just the vulnerability aspect of a story and maybe how younger professionals or up and coming leaders can balance that and wisdom?
Sure. Look, I think one of the things we've all, when COVID started, I don't think anyone had much experience on video calls. And so everyone got really excited by video calls because they said, wow, much better than texting, much better than cell phone calls, audio conference calls. This may replace being in person for sure. And everyone got really excited about it. But over time, I think people have realized that on a video call, it's hard to make an authentic personal connection. It's hard to mentor. It's hard to be mentored. It's hard to give feedback. And that vulnerability and that building relationships, that builds authenticity. It builds real relationships with people that you just can't do over video. And, again, I have 4 daughters, 21 to 28, and they, like all of us, have had ups and downs in their life's journey. And, you know, ideally, everyone learns a little something from those pitfalls, those dead ends, and that makes you better, that makes you stronger, and who better to tell that story than you? And so, and it makes you authentic, and it shows your resiliency and your ability to sort of pivot when you reached a dead end or something didn't go your way, and look at where you are now and look at what you're trying to do. And I think all of that is really valuable as part of the story and a part of who you are. And Chad, to the point you made, the context on how you approach decisions, et cetera. I a little bit about my dyslexia. So, there's now all kinds of schools and learning for dyslexia. I'm old enough that that they sort of recognized it was dyslexia, but it was sort of suck it up, buttercup. And so it always took me longer to learn things. And on midterms, and I was start off as a mechanical engineer and applied math major, I'd get no better than C's on midterms. It's because it took me longer to learn things, but my process of learning required me to look at things from multiple different directions. And by virtue of that process, I typically learned it better. So when I got to the final and there were trick questions, I typically did better. So it taught me to trust the process, taught me not to panic, and it taught me to think, quite frankly, out of the box, which have been super valuable to how I show up in the workplace, how I make decisions, and how I try to mentor people at all levels.
We talk a lot about this concept of victor versus victim mindset and how no matter what your circumstances are, some are dealt cards that they have no control over that are very hard situations. But the posture that we choose, it really matters. And the most successful people are the ones that say, you know what, this situation, whether it was my fault or someone else's fault or just happens to me, I'm going to acknowledge that it's hard. I'm going to acknowledge that it stinks, but I'm also going to take ownership for my response and how I'm going to improvise, how I'm going to adapt, how I'm going to overcome. And just to hear you kind of expound more on that story of can't imagine like with some of the programs you were doing with math and engineering and Stanford school, like to be in the same kind of classes with folks that didn't have that kind of learning disability, to be able to improvise, adapt, overcome, and to see how you've leveraged that. I think it's helped you as you talk about thinking outside the box. It's clearly helped be a differentiator for you throughout the rest of your career. And I want people to hear that. And so whatever you're struggling with, whatever cards have been dealt to you that are very hard, how can you improvise, adapt, overcome, and how can you leverage those into ways that actually make you stronger, make you better, make you more effective as a leader? So very inspiring to hear that. You also talk about this concept of decision making. I know you mentioned that too, Dallas. I'd love for you to expound more on that. Talk to us about how can young professionals and early career leaders, mid-level leaders, how do they enhance that skill set of making decisive decisions?
Sure. I was chuckling as you were going over that mindset piece because when my daughters were young and they were cold, I was a broken record saying, "Hey, that's a state of mind. Just don't think you're cold and you won't be cold. You'll be fine." And so I chuckled at your state of mind because I fully believe that. So to the decision making, one of the things I've observed with young people is, it's a little bit afraid of making a decision and showing up, but a little bit afraid it'll be a stupid question where they'll quote be wrong. And, what I remind them is, look, in the work world and in life, there are very few black and white decisions. Most decisions have various shades of gray. And everyone approaches that a little bit differently. And it's hard to get feedback. It's hard to offer support if I don't know where your head and your heart are leaning on a decision. So it's actually better to make a decision and be wrong than don't make a decision. Because there's shades of gray, being quote wrong, if you're energetic and you're passionate and you tweak it along the way, it may end up not being wrong. And oh, by the way, you're never going to have perfect information. And what I share with folks is I proposed to my wife when I was 70% sure. And everyone laughs and I say, okay, so you missed the point. I acted, I made a decision. And to the extent on lots of these decisions, including proposing to someone, to think that you're going to have 100% certainty on something that's supposed to last for 70 years or whatever it is, that's a fool's errand. And in the workplace, the hard decisions and those decisions that differentiate leaders from not leaders are those decisions where people have developed a thesis, a point of view, and are willing to put themselves out there and sort of talk about how and why they got to that decision, bring other people along in a way that helps other people understand that you heard them and their point of view that helped inform your decision. That gets back to that how that I was talking about. If as you're communicating that you've heard everyone else's point of view and that's been incorporated in your decision, you know, That's powerful. And oh, by the way, we get better at making decisions as we do it more. So if you never start, you'll never get better. So you got to start. And every succeeding decision, you'll get better at the evaluation, you'll get better at the communication, you'll get better at asking the necessary questions, and you'll get better at decision making.
So Dallas, this reminds me, one of my favorite quotes comes from a hero of mine, Craig Rochelle. He says that if you wait until you're 100% sure to do something, you can guarantee it's too late. You can guarantee it's too late. So he's talking about in the context of innovation, but even as I'm thinking about your proposal decision,
For
if you
sure.
waited till you're 100% sure, she might not have been around anymore, right? But
I,
that's the way it is in business too.
I'm 92.3% sure now. So and then you might say, well, where is she? She's only at 74.2 right now. So
But so talk to, because I think a common challenge in large organizations, especially, is what we would call analysis paralysis. So you can stew over decisions, and you have a team meeting about it. And it's like, oh, this is really good information. Well, next time let's talk about it, and let's come back with X, Y, and Z data points, and let's talk some more. And you can just keep on kicking that can down the road. I think most people who have been in large organizations have experienced that to some degree. Any practical tips on how do you, inside your organization, create this culture of decisiveness to be able to say, and so you don't wallow in analysis paralysis?
look, it's a good question. And I would say well, here's what I would say. At Cox, I think we do a really good job at running the business, managing the business for our long-term values. And the way I like to talk about our long-term values, we want to show up for all of our stakeholders, including our customers, including our employees, including the communities that we serve, and doing the right thing. And that's values. Culture can embrace those values, but it can manifest a little differently depending on, is a particular organization more mature than another one? Is one, early stage and it's very dynamic and having to grow really fast? It can also be a little different depending on the leader. So we certainly have organizations within Cox Enterprises where there is a little bit of analysis paralysis, and that's just part of the culture of that organization, and that team needs to be wary of it. We have another organization where things are a little bit more dynamic, and they have to be wary of not being consistent to the message and consistent to the plan. So on both sides of that, there are whenever you have a situation and you make a decision and you approach something, there will be gaps that you need to be mindful of and try to manage so that they don't come back to bite you. And you do the best you can, and hopefully you're constantly on a path towards improvement. But that's the kind of thing where you'll never get to nirvana. You'll never get to perfection.
Thank you for sharing that. Just kind of as we transition here, one of the things I know you're also super passionate about is purpose. And you have a different, unique take on purpose. Can you maybe talk a little bit about what your why is, what drives you, what motivates you?
It's interesting. When I came into this role 9 years ago, we had a long-term goal on how the company would show up in 2034, growth goals, how we'd show up to our stakeholders. And we have this purpose of empowering people to provide for a better future for the next generation. And what I find is sometimes purpose and sometimes these goals are so far out, it scares me because I don't know how I'm going to get from here to there. And so I've talked about the what and the how, and I get excited by the what and the how. I get excited by what I'm doing now. I get excited about the way I engage with people, the way we talked about my decision-making process relative to my dyslexia. I get excited about helping teams, communicating, asking questions. And when I think about our future and how we want to show up in 2034, I get excited by having multiple irons in the fire today and the whole process of deciding which iron we're going to double down on and which iron we're going to pull back, and how and when and how we bring the team along. And by virtue of these multiple irons in the fire, it gives me more confidence I'll be able to get to that future goal and that future purpose. Now, having said that, what's nice about diversity is some people get passion and driven by that long-term goal, and I completely respect that and love those kinds of people. All I say is that for some folks like me, it's a little bit scary. It's too far out. It's too ethereal. I don't know how I'm going to get from here to there. I get more excited by sort of the what and the how. And I think in any organization, you need a little bit of both. And so, if someone asked me for my why or my purpose, I'd sort of go back to the what and the how. And I like someone asked me the other day why I've stayed at Cox, and it's because I've been able to have multiple different careers all within one company. It's good people. I'm energized. I'm learning new things. I'm challenged. It's with good people. It's allowed me to have a wonderful family and engage in the Atlanta community. And you think back when you were in high school, imagining what your life would be, or when you graduated college, and I'm happy. And it's more about the journey than the destination.
I love the way you articulate that because it's something that I haven't put words to, but I can totally resonate. And so there's times even for myself where it's like I would get really fired up about the overarching big goal, the moonshot that we're going towards. And other times it's harder to get there. And you're like, oh, that's gonna be probably 50 years before we see anything like that. So to know that, go ahead.
Well, so I've got four buddies. We've known each other since fifth, sixth grade. We affectionately call ourselves the geeks. And one of them, since sixth or seventh grade, he knew he wanted to be an oceanographer. And sure enough, he went to college, majored in oceanography, got his PhD in oceanography. And sure enough, he is an oceanographer at Woods Hole up in Falmouth, Massachusetts. I'm still trying to figure out what I want to be when I grow up. So, it just sort of underscores, different strokes for different folks, and that's okay.
Yeah. And, what I like about it too is that it's so clearly still that you're driven by purpose, and the way that you define that is like, "Hey, this is in the journey," and I think that's a beautiful thing to find purpose, not just in some destination that may be way out there in the future, but you can shoot for great goals and great destinations too, but to really soak up the journey and the process, I think is a really admirable thing. Another closing question for you, Dallas, is if you could think of any leader, past or present, that you could have lunch with, what leader would that be for you?
So many leaders have had influence on me within the Cox environment. When I started, a gentleman by the name of Jim Robbins was the CEO of Cox Communications, and he retired at the end of '05, and unfortunately passed away about a year and a half after retirement. And he was a mentor, and I was able to work closely with him when I ran investor relations. And so, would love to have lunch with him and talk about leadership and talk about my journey since he's passed, and talk about his family, his wife, his grandkids. So it'd be Jim Robbins.
That's really cool. And that's just a great reminder of the impact that you can have on everyday people. We spend 90,000 hours of our lives at work over the course of our lives. And that's the kind of impact, the purpose that you can impart on others by the way that you lead, the way you carry yourself. Last question for you is as you think about what's next for you and the sort of impact to tie it into impact that you're trying to have, is there any sort of BHAG or big, hairy, audacious goal that you're personally going after, either professionally or in your personal life these days?
Gosh, I've got four daughters, 21 to 28, and arguably the most important thing is I want them to grow up and be happy, and if there's anything I can do by offering advice or lessons learned, I want to try to do that within the Cox world. I think about two things. I think about people, and that includes mentoring young folks. It includes succession planning, and so I want to make sure that I'm imparting whatever tidbits of wisdom I have so that the Cox people can be more successful and can carry on the name of this great company. Last year, we celebrated 125 years. We've been around a long time. And then the other thing I focus on at Cox is capital allocation. I'm sort of been around a long time, and capital allocation is some of the hardest things you can do, and the most impactful for how a business is set up for the future. And so I want to make sure we're allocating our capital in the most effective way. And so those are things I focus on: family, and then those two things for Cox, and those are it.
Beautiful. Hey, this has been an absolute blast to have you on the show. Thanks so much for being here, and I can't wait to see all that you continue to do with your legacy going forward.
Well, Blake, Chad, I appreciate it very much. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining, Dallas.
If you enjoyed this episode, the best thing you can do is be a river, not a reservoir. Who could you share this with that could also get value from it as well? Until next time, keep leading on purpose. Peace.